First, I want to start out by giving a general overview of what is contained within a SharePoint farm. The SharePoint farm is a way that Microsoft terms the grouping of the servers to accomplish a certain goal, which is a SharePoint installation. There are really three components of a SharePoint farm, namely the database server, the application server, and the web front end. The application server and the web front end are both driven by Internet Information Services and various components to provide the functionality, whereas the database server is obviously to store the content. So when we talk about the database server, we can have this installed in a number of ways, all of which use Microsoft SQL. In a small installation of SharePoint, and I should mention that SharePoint can be installed all on one computer or on separate computers. And in the case of SharePoint, or the case of the database server, it can also be then expanded out further that one or more database servers can be had and installed into a SharePoint farm, both with SQL clustering and then support of SharePoint. Now, within each database server, there are a couple key components to look at. The first of these is that in a given farm, there is one database called the config database. The config database is responsible for controlling and maintaining the topology of that SharePoint installation. So what servers are doing which ones are installed, which ones are new and need to be spun up, and it also maintains a list of what applications have been deployed to the different parts of the SharePoint farm. Now, the other databases are called content databases, and this is where the actual content of a SharePoint installation is stored. And so in that, you have two different pieces of information. So of course, it's maintaining the metadata. But also, to take it up to another level, you have to consider that in SharePoint, at least for now, in the next release of SharePoint, I'm fairly certain to say that this will not be the case. All of the actual files are stored in blobs, which are binary large objects. And so that means that every single thing that you need to do SharePoint is contained within the database server. The next layer up, when you look at it, and this layer may or may not exist depending on the size of the farm. Oftentimes, the application servers all sit on the web front end in a particularly small farm. But in our case, let's assume that we're talking about a medium to large size farm, and then we'll actually have a couple machines that get pulled off, and each of these serve a particular functionality. They don't handle client requests, but what they do handle is indexing, Excel services, and then also sometimes a shared service provider is pulled off and considered into an application layer, but you can also put custom applications in this portion. And so what this gives you is a way to pull off the heavy processing components into this layer so that the web front ends will then all be available to handle incoming requests. Now on the web front end, this is where things get interesting because you can have a number of different situations where the web front ends are load balanced. So you have a number of different servers and then a load balancer to distribute the load as the incoming requests are received. Now the web front ends have a particular arrangement, I guess you could call it, and it leverages IIS very heavily. IIS is Microsoft's Internet Information Server. And so in IIS, everything is contained and executed within what's called an app pool. So this application pool is actually a worker process, and in the case of SharePoint, it's called w3wp.exe. And this worker process then contains other small parts or other different applications. So each application then runs in its own execution space, but is still part of that process. So a single one of these applications, and we can have more than one of these, then says, okay, I have my application, and this says I will be listening on a port. So there is one application per port, and then you can extend those applications, and so you can access them from different ports, but we'll get into that later. So this could be, say, port 80. And in port 80, I want to make a website, or I want to make a team space. So what I do is I create what's called a site collection. And this site collection is what holds the different components of SharePoint and all the different actual functionality when